Let's just pray. God, thank you so much for giving us these ancient words. Lord, help us, please, to listen to your words, to hear your message, and help me to not hinder that process. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a woman whose name was Pleasantness. She was also known by her nickname, Beautiful. She was a lovely, lovely lady and was married to a man whose name was God is King. Pleasantness and God is King lived in a town by the name of House of Bread, also known as House of Fruitfulness. They had a wonderful life, and God blessed them with 2 sons. But the names of their sons revealed that not all was well. One son was named Man of Weakness, and the other son was named Wasting Away. Perhaps it was an omen of things to come, because a great famine came on the land. Pleasantness and God is King took their 2 sons, Man of Weakness and Wasting Away, and went to another land where the customs and the language and the gods were very different, but where there was some food. Not too long after settling there, God is King passed away. He died. And Pleasantness was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons got married to women from that place. They married Neck and Friend, who was also known as Companion. After being there for 10 years, the 2 sons died. Pleasantness, also known as Beautiful, had lost her husband and her 2 sons. Then she heard that the Lord had helped those where they had come from. He had supplied food for those living in House of Bread, and so she planned to return there. She told her daughters-in-law to return to their homes and look for another husband. Neck cried and wept aloud and reluctantly turned back and went to the home of her parents. Friend clung to Pleasantness and declared her intention to stay true to her name and be companion to her all the days of her life. They arrived back in the town of House of Bread, and the news spread like wildfire. Beautiful has returned and brought someone with her. The women ran out to greet her and said, "Can this be Pleasantness?" And she replied, "Don't call me Pleasantness. Call me Bitter, for God has made my life bitter. I went away full, and I have come back empty." A little bit later, Companion, known as Friend, said to Pleasantness, who was now called Bitter, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Bitter agreed, and so off went Companion to one of the fields just outside of town. She found a field, asked permission to glean, and went to work. She worked really hard, taking hardly any breaks, and the workers were impressed with her. Later in the day, the man who owned the field arrived. His name was In Strength. He was a kind, generous, thoughtful man of integrity and faith. In Strength was impressed with Companion's work ethic, and her reputation had preceded her. He knew she was kind and thoughtful, a faithful woman who had been very good to her mother-in-law. He invited her to eat with him, and he gave orders to the workers to let her pick grain amongst the harvesters and to protect her, and even to leave extra grain for her to collect. Companion went home and shared with Bitter the good news of the wonderful man she had met who was so kind to her. Some of the bitterness lifted, and her mother-in-law asked her the name of the man in whose field she happened to be gleaning. Companion told her, The name of the man I worked with today is In Strength. Bitterness was diminishing by the minute, and pleasantness was returning. Pleasantness cried out, "Oh, the Lord bless him. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." Pleasantness encouraged Companion to stay in his field and allow him to protect her and supply all of their needs. One day, Pleasantness decided it was time for some matchmaking. She encouraged Companion to bathe, to put on perfume, to get dressed up in her best clothes, and to go to In Strength in the night and lay at his feet. She did this. It was a bold move because Companion was basically asking In Strength to marry her. During the night, In Strength woke up and he felt something at his feet and said, "Who is that?" And she said, "I am your servant, Companion. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer of our family." In Strength was overwhelmed. Companion was young and beautiful, and she could have gone after anyone in town, the men who were younger. But she had chosen him. He said to her, "I will do for you all that you ask." There were some steps that had to be taken the next morning, but In Strength was on a mission. He purchased the family land that had belonged to God is King and the sons, and dedicated it back to God is King and his dead sons. In Strength then declared to everyone in town that he was going to marry Companion. In Strength and Companion got married, and when they made love, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. They named him Servant of God, Worshipper. Okay, who's our story about? Okay, so Pleasantness, also known as Beautiful, was Naomi. And when she felt that God was against her, she said, "Call me Mara," which means bitter. But then she again felt God's blessing, and once again she became Naomi, Pleasantness and Beautiful. Her husband, Elimelech, was God is King. Her sons, Man of Weakness was Mahlon, and Wasting Away was Chilion. And then they got married, and Chilion married Orpah. And Orpah's not really a Hebrew name, so the closest we get in Hebrew is neck. That's really not pleasant. Okay, but Ruth became definitely a Hebrew name, and she married Mahlon, and that means companion or friend. The town they lived in, House of Bread, Bethlehem. In Strength, Boaz. And he acted as her Goel, her kinsman redeemer. And Ruth and Boaz had a son, and he was officially named Mahlon after his dead father, because it all went to him. But everybody, all the neighbors, called him Obed, and Obed stuck, servant of God or worshipper. If you watched the DVD piece last night, there was one website I found that said worker, but every other one said servant of God or worshipper, so I ran with that. I liked it better. Okay, so the story of Ruth. The chapters in the Bible leading up to the story of Ruth and the chapters after the story of Ruth, there's lots of carnage and war and killing and mayhem and unfaithfulness. And the story of Ruth is just this beautiful oasis of love and faithfulness in the midst of all the unfaithfulness around them in the period of the Judges. Naomi, even though she's feeling bitter and feeling that God has cursed her, still must have had her nature of pleasantness and beautiful, active and flourishing, because Naomi was just so drawn to her that she was willing to leave her family and go to a foreign land where she could very well be treated as an outcast, so that she could be with Naomi and support her and look after her. So Naomi remained faithful to God no matter what was happening, even though she was feeling down, disappointed and bitter. Ruth and Boaz were both people of kindness and thoughtfulness, willingness to sacrifice for the sake of others. They had integrity, they were hardworking, they were strong, and the list just goes on and on. This is a story about a picture of God and us. The women are absolutely destitute. They've come to Bethlehem to sell Elimelech's land and probably to sell themselves into servitude, living the rest of their lives as servants. We are absolutely destitute. We have nothing to commend ourselves. We are slaves to sin and Satan. Satan came along in the Garden of Eden and he kidnapped us, and we are in a hopeless situation. Boaz was the kinsman redeemer, and that's a beautiful picture of God. The word in Hebrew is goel, and this was your nearest relative who helped you in times of great need. Naomi and Ruth had no means of income to support themselves, no male in their household for respectability and identity, no prospects of anything getting any better, and so they were in desperate need of a kinsman redeemer, a near relative who would come and rescue them from this horrible situation. The Bible has lots to tell us about the kinsman redeemer. I'm only going to highlight 3 things. There's a big long list, but I've just picked 3 of them out. So the goel was to redeem property that was given up by a poor relative, and Leviticus 25:25 tells us that. Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion had property that could be sold to the nearest of kin who was willing to help the ladies, and that became Boaz. There was one who was nearer of kin, but he did not step up to the plate, and so Boaz got the opportunity. Part and parcel of purchasing the property was to marry the widow and to have a child, and to name that child after the dead father so that the land would stay in the dead husband's family, so to speak. So even though Boaz purchased the property, he didn't really gain anything. He actually sacrificed. God is our goel. He is our kinsman, our nearest kin who redeems us. Our property is the earth. It was given to us at creation, and we gave it to Satan when we chose him over God. He became the prince of this world. Part of what happened at the cross was that Christ became the ruler of this earth, and so began the redemption process. And the land will be fully redeemed at the end of time. I just want to check out the upper story that's happening here. The beginning and the end of the Bible is like 2 bookends that just encapsulate the whole story that happens in between, and I really like the way it does it. If we have a look at Genesis 1, we see the story of creation. The earth belongs to us. Genesis 2 tells us a story of intimacy with God. We are made in his image. We are his nearest kin. Genesis chapter 3 tells us the story of how the tempter came in, and sin and evil and death. Now we jump to the very end of the Bible, the end of the story. Revelation chapter 20 talks about Satan being bound and being destroyed, and sin and evil being no more. So you see, Genesis 3 and Revelation 20 are both talking about Satan and evilness and sin, but it's the flip side of the story. Revelation chapter 21 tells us about intimacy restored as God once again dwells with us, and he will be our God and we will be his children, and there will be no more tears and no more death. And Revelation chapter 22 tells us of recreation, when the earth is made new, and once again we live here, and we live here for eternity with our kinsman redeemer. So the job of the kinsman redeemer was to redeem the property, and God is redeeming the earth for us. Number 2, the goel was to redeem a relative who had sold himself into slavery. And Leviticus chapter 25 and those verses give you the biblical references here. We are slaves to sin and Satan. John chapter 8 verse 34, Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." John chapter 8 also tells us that when we know the truth, Jesus, the truth will set us free. We all belong to Satan. We are slaves to him. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death, so we all deserve death. But Jesus died in our place. He took the guilt and shame that was ours to redeem us and set us free. John chapter 8 and verse 36, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. God, our Goel, our nearest of kin, redeemed us from slavery to sin and Satan. And number 3, the Goel was to appear in a lawsuit as a helper for a relative. The Goel would make sure that justice was done. And there's a few verses there, Proverbs 23:11, Psalms 119, 154, and I'm just going to share with you Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 34. Yet their Redeemer is strong. The Lord Almighty is his name. He will vigorously defend their cause so that he may bring rest to their land. And the word Redeemer there, Goel, our kinsman Redeemer. God is our nearest of kin, and he is strong, and he vigorously defends our cause so that we may know the amazing rest of being in him. Isn't that a beautiful concept? All there in the book of Ruth. God is our nearest of kin. At creation, he made us in his image. We are kin with God. Satan came along and kidnapped us. And in our stupidity, we just went and hopped in the car, so to speak, with him. He was the big bad guy, and we missed it. He's taken us for a ride. God is doing everything he can to get us back. He purchases our property. He redeems us out of slavery. He gives us true freedom and an identity. And he appears for us on our behalf to make sure that justice happens. He is our defense attorney, and he is our judge. Boaz represents God in the story. In strength, redeems his kin at great sacrifice to himself so that he can be in intimate relationship with them and cherish them. God redeemed us at great sacrifice to himself. He left the perfection of heaven and came down and lived in the squalor of here. He experienced ridicule and rejection and torture and was crucified to purchase us, to redeem us, to rescue us, to reconcile us to himself so that he can be in intimate relationship with us and cherish us. One day soon, he will present us with the earth made new, where we will live together for eternity. Jesus calls us to remember his sacrifice as our kinsman redeemer, so that we will be reminded of just how precious we are to him and how much he loves us. John chapter 13, the start of the Last Supper, and then after that you've got Gethsemane and the cross. Jesus starts off that whole section of his life with now he showed, or John says it, now he showed them the full extent of his love. He purchased us with his bruised and battered flesh and his spilt blood. He purchased us with his life. He died so that we do not need to die. He is our nearest of kin who redeems us. And the primary Sabbath school class this morning made this beautiful. They all worked on it. Each one had their piece, and then they put it all together. This is a representation of our kinsman redeemer and the lengths to which he was willing to go because he loves us and he wants to redeem us. Isn't that beautiful? And today we have a special service that we are doing to celebrate that outpouring of God's love and sacrifice. In a moment, we're going to move into the fellowship hall and we will have the opportunity to wash each other's feet. For those who are not familiar with this practice, that just sounds gross, but bear with us. At the Last Supper, Jesus arose, got the basin of water, knelt down before the disciples, one by one, and washed their feet. He served them, and then he told us to copy what he did. So we do. As we kneel before someone and wash their feet, it is a reminder that we are to humbly serve others. Today, as you kneel before someone and wash their feet, talk to the Lord and ask him what acts of kindness you can do this week, this month, to serve someone. As we sit and allow someone to wash our feet, just as the disciples sat and allowed Jesus to wash their feet, I would invite you to be reminded that we are not self-sufficient. We are totally dependent on God to wash us clean of our sin, to redeem us, and to set us free from sin. As you sit and allow someone else to wash your feet, I invite you to talk with the Lord. Thank him for the gift of salvation. Thank him that he is our nearest of kin, who at great sacrifice to himself chose to redeem us. Be in awe of our loving kinsman redeemer, who loves us and was willing to do whatever it took to rescue us from Satan and claim us as his own. And when you've done that, I would invite you to pray together. Whoever washes each other's feet, just pray together. And then when you come back into the sanctuary, please leave every alternate row empty. So, fill up every second row. Every other row needs to be left empty, just for ease of distributing the grape juice and the unleavened bread for the rest of the service. So when we move out into the foyer and wash each other's feet, that's not the signal to go home. We're coming back, because there's more that Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. So we will. Okay, please move out to wash each other's feet.